Stephanie Allensworth, and this is Real People.
Welcome to the show. Today we talk about sexual violence and human trafficking. We go to the Sexual Violence Center in Minneapolis and Cornerstone Advocacy in Bloomington. Thanks for meeting with me today, Maggie.
Of course.
Let's start with learning a little bit about you and what brought you to Cornerstone.
So I have a master's degree in global youth development from the University of Montana, and I've been doing this work in Montana, Arkansas, and now here in Minnesota. And I'm the community liaison advocate here at Cornerstone and work specifically with sexually exploited youth and young adults and those that have been identified as trafficking victims.
Well, that's very awesome. So how did you get involved? What was your inspiration for going in this direction?
I have been working with vulnerable populations for several years and have done volunteer work both domestically and internationally. And it was just a topic that kind of grabbed a hold of my heartstrings and didn't let go.
So tell us a little bit about Cornerstone and the services that are provided here.
Cornerstone is a multi-service organization. We've been around since 1983, and we offer resources and services to domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking survivors and those that have been impacted or witnessed those.
Well, you said the vulnerable. Who are the most vulnerable?
I would say that the most vulnerable population are those that kind of are marginalized populations. So youth are very vulnerable just because of their age. Those that are coming from communities of color that are impoverished, but realistically anybody can be a victim of exploitation and trafficking.
And when you say anybody, let's talk about that, because I think the stereotype is that it's just young women. Tell us more about what population, what range.
Yeah, so when I say anyone, I really mean anybody. So I have worked with young girls and young adults. I've worked with adult survivors who were in their 40s and 50s who have been in trafficking situations and have been prostituted for a majority of their lives. As well, I've worked with gender nonconforming youth and young adults, as well as biological males, both juveniles and young adult men.
Wow. What is the youngest age that you've seen?
That I have seen is 13 that I've worked with. However, I've heard from other service providers, as well as through media, several years younger than that, unfortunately.
So what can we do if we see somebody that we feel is at risk? What does the average person do? How do you react and try to intervene? Who do you contact?
So certainly if it's an emergency, if you think that there could be a way for police to intervene, definitely call 911. I know we oftentimes say, if you see something, say something. Well, we can say something about this and not just about the suspicious package, right? However, there is Polaris Project, which operates the United States trafficking hotline. So you can also call to do a report with them, and then they will route that back either to like the BCA here in Minnesota or to another state agency that will get that to the appropriate parties. However, we do have a crisis line. Cornerstone operates Day One, which was one of our programs, and that is a statewide hotline here in Minnesota for victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual violence as well.
Wow. It just blows my mind, really. So let's talk about the market for sex trafficking and who are the buyers?
Well, there's actually a study that was done this past year that it was released, and I believe in August, and it's called Mapping the Demand. It was done by the Minnesota's Urban Research Center, and they say that statistically it is white middle-aged men that are married with children. They also recognize that in a given year with the people that they surveyed that there's 22,000 men that have purchased sex within the last year here in Minnesota. I've worked a few sting operations where I've kind of seen that thing firsthand, and it is a very difficult position to be in, to see that and to see the ripple effect of people that are coming to purchase or believe that they're going to purchase somebody. And a lot of times we focus on the victim in that case and are kind of like, yay, he's getting arrested or he's going to be charged. But we also have to think about the ripple effect of his family, whether he's married or not, or has children, and then potentially his wife's family, right? And the impact that that can have. So on a, there's not a lot of perceived consequences, and that's why it's a much bigger issue than what we even know. And they oftentimes purchase before, during, or after work because those are times they can get away. So this is not a Saturday night, middle of the night, coming home from the bars issue.
Yeah, a lunchtime, I'm going to go make a purchase.
Yep.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about just all-around awareness? And, obviously we have the Super Bowl coming here, and I know that Lindsay's going to be talking with us in a minute about that, but I'm not sure how to articulate what I want to say. How can we keep our children safe?
Yes, that's a great question. That's where I was about to go. Talk to your children, and you can start talking to them honestly younger and younger, because my nieces and nephews have phones in their hands, and that was far before I got one growing up. And so really need to be realistic and talking to children, not just in the sense of, oh my gosh, you need to learn this information so you don't get trafficked, but we need to be talking to our children about online safety and what does it mean if somebody sends a picture or receives a picture. We have to stop there. It doesn't need to be forwarded on. So I've worked with several young adults who would be, and youth who would be identified as exploited. They necessarily hadn't been trafficked for sex and traded for money, but their pictures were taken either of them or sent out and put on the internet, and that's a form of exploitation. So we need to be talking about it in that sense. There's some really great material that is out there. Love 146 has a curriculum called Not a Number. I'm a licensed trainer. However, they have really good information for parents, so I would encourage people to go onto their website, which is Love 146, and read up on that about how to talk to your children, because it can be an uncomfortable conversation. I do this work every day, but still sometimes my nieces and nephews ask me questions, and just because it's family, I'm like, oh gosh, this is kind of weird, right? Yeah, even though I have some very difficult conversations, but sometimes that kind of stranger feel, you can talk to people more when you don't really know them. And so need to talk to, your kids about, definitely right now, pictures.
Right, and the internet, you brought up the internet, and that's a really good point too, because sometimes these guys are out there pretending to be somebody they're not, and drawing the kids in that way. And I think it's really important to know, if it's somebody you don't know, don't engage. Don't turn the camera on for them. Don't trust. It's hard to say, but it's hard to trust people, especially if they're strangers. It's still the same. Don't talk to strangers.
And one thing with that, a lot of times when people say human trafficking, they oftentimes, think of the movie Taken, right? That this is a kidnapping, and it doesn't look like that. I mean, it does happen, but not in the way that media typically puts it out there.
Right.
So one thing that I would also say when we talk about trafficking is we talk about the grooming stage, and that is when the trafficker or potential exploiter is grooming the person, and that means that they're spending time, they're building that trust. So they're not, coming into the picture or meeting somebody online and saying, hey, tomorrow night I'm going to make you do X, Y, and Z. It takes weeks, months, and potentially years to build that trust. And that is a way where they can kind of push boundaries instead of kind of just stepping over that hard line really quickly. That's going to take people back, and they may make a report that way, because typically we say, if somebody hurts you, call 911, tell somebody. Well, who do I talk to if they're just kind of making you feel uncomfortable, but they haven't really done anything wrong.
So there's this recent case, and I don't remember the girl's name that went missing, but they say she started a relationship with this boy and started spending time with him, and next thing you know, there's a gang of boys hanging around her, and next thing you know, she's missing. I don't recall exactly which case that was, but it was very recent. And it speaks exactly to that, what you were just saying, about they come in and they earn your trust, and then next thing you know, they flip a switch, and now they show their real colors.
And we talk a lot about that, especially in this prevention curriculum that I do. We talk about the grooming stage, and that is hard, you know, as youth are growing up and they're trying to figure out, okay, I'm kind of interacting in the adult world, but I'm not quite there yet, you know, and I'm taught growing up that, you know, I need to respect adults, or I need to trust my teachers, and I need to trust my coaches and things like that. And how many cases do we see where the people that we tell youth to trust are taking advantage of them? And that's very similar in the sense of an exploitation or trafficking case, where oftentimes that person presented themselves as a father figure or as a boyfriend, as somebody that was caring in their life that took advantage of the vulnerabilities that they had.
That's very powerful information from Maggie. I hope it raises everyone's awareness. I'm talking to Lindsay, the director of Not in Our City 5K. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about the 5K and the events going on around the Super Bowl here.
Sure. So the Not in Our City 5K was created this last year to help raise funds and awareness for human trafficking, and to get some of the different service providers kind of working together a little bit more, and more spaces for them to interact. And we're using the moment of the Super Bowl, the attention that it's getting, to kind of draw people into the conversation, but really drive home the message that this is an everyday issue in our state. And so there's been cool stuff we've done with that. And then additionally, I am on the leadership committee for a broader sort of cohort that's been meeting for quite a while to get the Twin Cities ready for this event, and to figure out how do we actually use this to improve what already is being done. The encouraging thing being that a lot of great things are happening here. So.
Well, tell us a little more about you and how you got into this subject matter.
Sure. I've known my whole life that I have a heart and a calling around helping with violence against women, and human trafficking is, though it certainly affects girls and boys, is the worst of the worst when it comes to violence, and I just knew that this was something that I needed to spend time on.
Wow. And it's a global thing. It's not just United States, not one state, not one community. It's all around the world. Do you have any available stats on, just off the top of your head, about how many children might be leaving this country due to trafficking?
There aren't hard statistics. The majority, what you tend to find is the majority of people that are being sexually exploited actually are within the United States, and they're U.S. citizens. You do get instances of people from here being taken out of the country. More often than not, you have people from here taken to different states. And then certainly some people internationally brought here, but most people are trafficked within the United States. And then with labor trafficking, it kind of flips. Most people that are being labor trafficked are brought from outside of the United States. There are a few instances that they're brought from here elsewhere, but usually it's more the other way around.
Yeah, and the labor trafficking, what type of work are they being trafficked to do?
It can really be anything. You see it the most in agriculture or food services. It happens a lot, but there are instances where someone is a personal aid to somebody in a home, but it's really just a house slave. There actually was, I can't remember how long ago, but there was a recent story where someone in Woodbury was found that they were a house slave. So if you start poking around, you'll find it.
Wow. What else would you like to share with us to raise the awareness?
I think it's just most important that people become knowledgeable about what this issue is and what it isn't, because it really thrives in darkness. One of the challenges and why it's so prevalent here is that a lot of people don't like to get in each other's business and know what's going on, which we certainly don't want people poking around. But if you know what it is, what it isn't, how to spot it, but more than anything, we need to be challenging the demand, because if there aren't people buying, there aren't people being sold.
Right, right. Remove the buyers and you remove the problem.
Exactly.
So what can someone do if they see somebody that they feel is at risk or vulnerable or actually being trafficked?
And you can download this little tip sheet off the Women's Foundation website, and it's essentially what are the different signs that you can see to spot it, and then what do you do? And so it's anything from, more often than not, what you're seeing is a situation where there are two individuals interacting. The victim, they won't make eye contact with anyone. They seem pretty deferential. They'll maybe seem kind of fidgety and scared. Usually there's pretty good indications of malnourishment or abuse. And those are the easiest ones. Part of it's you kind of feel your gut, something just seems off. More often than not, the person that's trafficking is older than the individual being trafficked, so there's kind of a unique difference in age. And then the most important thing to do when you see that really would be to call 911 or that Polaris hotline, because your instinct might be to step in and save the individual, but because of the trauma bond that's formed and the surrounding information, you would actually be putting yourself and them at risk. If you interrupt a situation happening, the trafficker could enact violence on you or on the person, and so that's why it's best to call the authorities.
Okay. And around the states, I know Minnesota is very progressive in taking action, but what is being done around the rest of the United States to do the same thing? Take the lead.
Different states are doing better and worse. Minnesota is definitely leading the country. We're among some of the best. New York, there's a lot that's happening, and part of that's because the safe harbor law originated out that way, and that's what made it so that anyone under 18, they've now expanded it to 24, is viewed as a victim and gets access to services. Not every state has enacted it though, and of the states that have enacted it, not all of them actually have funding, and so great, you're not a criminal, but there's no resource for you to get out. So a lot of it's being done built around those laws, and then any organizations that are directly working with survivors, and so it really varies state by state, community by community, but there should hypothetically be laws in all of the states that address this. It's just a question of enforcement.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. I so appreciate you taking the time out and talking to us about this today. And I think have a great time with the 5K.
Thank you.
And keep doing such a great job for all the people that need you to be doing exactly what you're doing today. I'm here at the Sexual Violence Center talking with Kristen Sakura. Kristen, tell us a little more about this wall.
So we moved to this new office about 3 months ago, and before we were always in a space with a yard. And so this was an outdoor monument that we literally took apart to bring it with us because it is so precious to us. Each tile represents someone who was killed in prostitution.
Oh, wow.
And this monument was actually, we inherited it from an organization, a radical sort of activist group in the 90s called Whisper, Women in Prostitution Engaged in Revolt. Oh. And it was really, that group was on the forefront of breaking the silence about what we now call sex trafficking or sexual exploitation, and thinking about people who are engaged in that work actually are victims of sexual violence and shouldn't be subject to criminal charges and should actually be given all of our support if they don't want to be doing that kind of work and they would want a different kind of life. And so Whisper used to run their own crisis line for people who wanted to get out of prostitution. And unlike now, in those days, there just wasn't a lot of love for that kind of work. There wasn't a lot of support or general understanding of what sex trafficking was, and so unfortunately Whisper folded, and they asked the Sexual Violence Center to take on their crisis line, which we did, and then we also took their memorial.
This was their memorial as well?
Yes, and so when we left our last property that had that outdoor space, there was no way we were going to leave them behind, and so we got a really wonderful, nice tile setter to come and do this for free and kind of cut apart each strip and then bring it over here, and they actually moved here the day before we did. It for whatever reason, it really hit us in our heart that we were not going to leave them.
Right.
And so we're still figuring out the best place in our new office to hang them up, and then we want to rededicate it and invite the people who were involved in Whisper to come. And we don't even know if they remember that we have this.
Well, and this is a small subset of victims. So what is the age range here? Have you figured it
Well,
out?
mostly I think they're in their 30s or 40s, and some folks, I mean, there's someone who was actually unidentified, who was just found. I mean, some people look at this and they feel like it's a little bit dark. And they're like, you know, Kristen, why do you have tiles for dead people? But we know at the Sexual Violence Center that sexual violence in all of its manifestations also kills people.
Exactly.
Every day, marginalized people in our society are killed and they aren't remembered. And when I look at these tiles, I feel really happy because these folks, we're remembering them. We also support sex workers. So those are folks, like from the outside, it's going to look like the same kind of prostitution, but those are folks who are like, this is my work, this is my job, I'm not a victim of anything.
But they still run the same risks.
They do, and risks of sexual violence.
Exactly, yeah.
Even by law enforcement or, you know, by a John who doesn't pay them when they're supposed to. Because, you know, part of what we say is sexual violence is if you've been tricked into some kind of sexual behavior.
Okay.
And so if you think you're getting paid because it's your work and then someone doesn't pay you, that's kind of the definition of getting tricked. So I don't want to silence the experience of those folks. They are so marginalized. You know, whenever you hear about serial killers, right? And you look at who they killed, it's always prostituted people
at
and
a
homeless,
drug
you
stop.
know?
Tell us more about what services the center provides.
Sure. So the Sexual Violence Center is what's called a dedicated rape crisis center. So that means, unlike some other agencies that you might have heard of, we don't work on sort of multiple forms of crime. We focus on sexual violence. So there's other organizations that work on maybe general crime or support victims and the families of homicide victims or domestic violence. And for us, sexual violence is our focus. It's our area of expertise that we've honed over 33 years. But I want to tell you that sexual violence in and of itself is for us an umbrella term that encompasses many different manifestations and forms of behavior. So we're talking about sexual assault, we're talking about sexual abuse or molestation of children, we're talking about sexual abuse by people in positions of power in our culture, whether that's clergy sex abuse or whether it's a therapist as a perpetrator, stalking. We're also talking about sexual harassment, which might involve no contact whatsoever, and words might be the weapon.
But frightening.
Yeah, absolutely, and life-changing for
basically.
folks, yeah. And catcalling on the street, something called revenge porn, which
I've heard of that.
hasn't been actually criminalized for all that long in the state of Minnesota, but luckily now is considered a crime, and that would be online usually. So two people maybe exchanged intimate photos with each other or maybe took a video of a sex act when their relationship was good and then maybe one of them wants to break up and the other one is like, oh no, you know, if you break up with me, this photo that I have on my phone, I'm going to share it with everyone in our school. We see it in high schools a fair amount, or everyone in our workplace. And the terror of having that intimate photo of you shared, it's almost like a leash around someone's neck.
Exactly.
It's someone has complete power and
blackmail,
control
right?
over you. Yeah. Someone has complete power and control over you, and suddenly they dictate the terms. And so for us, sexual violence is any sexual behavior or contact that's what someone is using as a weapon against someone else to gain or reinforce power and control.
Okay.
I mean, sexual violence is social in nature. You can't do it to yourself. And so it takes two or more people. And whenever you have two or more people together, there's a story there. You know, they're coming from different walks of life. Maybe they're from different ethnic backgrounds.
And they're not all girls, right?
No, absolutely not. And so we work really hard at the Sexual Violence Center, actually not to gender the word victim. So you won't hear us say, a victim calls us she. You know, we try to keep that really gender inclusive. It's absolutely true. Most people who come forward and disclose some form of sexual violence are female identified. but it's not true all of them are. And when we treat it as something that only happens to women and girls, we are silencing trans and gender nonconforming folks. We are silencing boys and men. I can't tell you how often I'm out in public, we'll table somewhere and try to just get people to know about us and come talk to us. And I get men coming up to me saying, you know, I wish there was a place like that for men. And I'm like, no, we're for you too.
Yeah, it is for you.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's utterly unfair, you know, no matter who gets targeted. And we work with people who are 12 years of age and above, all walks of life. So they could be documented, they could be undocumented, they could be any religion in the world. It doesn't matter to us. They could speak any language. What the consistent issue here is it's not their fault. They did not deserve what happened to them, and we're the people who will continually tell them that when society probably usually tells them otherwise. SDC, we, in addition to individual counseling, we also run support groups, and we are always taking names for a male-identified support group. The last group that we just had running just ended about a month ago. And so we will offer that sort of male-only space if victims and survivors come forward to us and say that they want that. We have made that available, and we will absolutely make it available again. We want everybody to know that our services are available and they're free.
Wow, those tiles. Words can't say enough about the powerful emotion that lies in those. I'd like to thank our guests tonight for sharing their powerful stories. Until next time, I'm Stephanie Allensworth, and this is Real People.